When Mark Levin launched into one of his signature monologues, he thought he was delivering a cutting blow. The conservative talk host, known for his booming voice and sharp rhetoric, zeroed in on Representative Jasmine Crockett with what he considered a devastating critique. He mocked her law degree as though it were a trivial piece of paper, rather than the product of years of academic rigor and courtroom battles. To his listeners, Levin chuckled as if he had exposed a fraud, branding her credentials as laughable and painting her as an example of lawmakers who did not deserve their positions. He spoke with the confidence of someone who believed the ridicule would stick, that the audience would remember Crockett not for her service, but for Levin's sneer. Yet what Levin underestimated was how quickly such dismissals can crumble when met with unshakable truth. Crockett had spent years practicing law before stepping into the world of politics, carving out her identity in spaces where stakes were far higher than talk radio ratings. In courtrooms, where clients depended on her for justice, her degree wasn't a prop, it was a shield and a sword. It gave her the authority to stand in front of judges and juries, to defend people who often had no one else to speak for them. Levin's laughter might have entertained his base, but it ignored the weight that comes with actual legal work. That contrast between showmanship and substance became glaringly clear when the conversation shifted from the airwaves to a live, public forum where Crockett was asked to address his remarks. She did not meet ridicule with ridicule. Instead, she leaned forward and spoke with a steadiness that carried more impact than Levin's laughter ever could. "It's interesting," she said, "how a man who's made his career shouting into a microphone feels qualified to question years of courtroom practice." She didn't embellish or exaggerate. She simply put the facts on the table, reminding everyone that her degree was not an ornament, it was a tool she had wielded effectively in service to others. By mentioning Levin directly, she held up his commentary against her reality, and the contrast was impossible to ignore. The audience could see the difference between an entertainer's mockery and the hard-earned authority of someone who had walked into court after court, defending rights and pushing for justice. Levin's insult depended on painting Crockett's education as hollow, but her response made clear it had depth he could never touch. It wasn't just that she had earned a law degree, it was that she had applied it in ways that shaped lives and communities. Her words carried the subtle reminder that Levin's platform was powered by outrage, while hers had been powered by real cases, real clients, and real results. This was the quiet truth that made the room still. It wasn't a roar that silenced the crowd. It was the undeniable weight of reality against bluster. The more Crockett spoke, the clearer it became that Levin's approach had backfired. In trying to shrink her, he inadvertently gave her an opportunity to define herself in front of an audience that wasn't tuning in for entertainment but for substance. She outlined how her legal training wasn't about status but about service. She reminded people that she hadn't chosen the profession to collect applause from pundits, but because she understood the importance of defending those who had been silenced. In that framing, Levin's mockery seemed shallow, almost flimsy, compared to the gravity of her lived experience. What made the moment powerful was not anger but composure. Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't deliver insults of her own. She simply spoke from a position of credibility that Levin's commentary could never reach. The room, which had been bracing for a combative retort, instead received something sharper, an unflinching reminder that shouting down someone's degree is meaningless. When that degree has been used to fight injustice and uphold the law, the silence that followed was not uncomfortable but clarifying. It was as if everyone present understood, without needing it spelled out, that Levin's jab had only highlighted his distance from real experience. The story of that exchange became more than a clash of personalities. It became an illustration of how empty mockery dissolves when measured against the weight of actual work. Levin had tried to reduce Crockett's degree to a punchline, but in answering calmly, she transformed his ridicule into an opportunity to showcase her strength. She reframed the conversation in such a way that the audience left thinking not about his joke, but about her journey. That shift, born out of her refusal to let his words define her, silenced more than just a room, it silenced the doubt he had tried to cast. When the moment came for Jasmine Crockett to directly address Mark Levin's remarks, she knew that meeting insult with insult would only reduce her to his level. Levin had already laughed at her law degree on his show, tossing off the kind of dismissive commentary that played well with his loyal listeners. He wanted to create the impression that her background was hollow, that her education was merely symbolic rather than substantive. By mocking her, Levin was not simply questioning her personally, he was trying to undermine the credibility of her role as a lawmaker. Yet Crockett, with years of courtroom experience behind her, had long since learned that composure often lands harder than shouting. Her decision to respond in a measured tone became the very thing that turned Levin's mockery into a showcase of his own shallowness. The public forum where she was asked about Levin's comments was not designed for political theater. It was a straightforward discussion with constituents. the kind where people expected candid answers rather than flashy sound. When a member of the audience asked what she thought of Levin's mockery, the room shifted. It was clear people wanted to hear if she would fight fire with fire. Instead, Crockett spoke in a calm, deliberate rhythm. If Mark Levin thinks that shouting from behind a microphone makes him an authority on legal qualifications, she said, then maybe he should try defending someone in a courtroom before he talks about what a law degree is worth. There was no anger in her tone, just a steady confidence that instantly reframed the conversation. The contrast was striking. Levin had used derision, loudness, and laughter to make his point. Crockett used composure, fact, and presence. In that contrast lay the heart of why her response resonated so strongly. People expect anger when someone is mocked, but what silences an audience more effectively is certainty. Crockett knew exactly what her law degree represented, and she didn't need to shout it into existence. Her career already proved it. That quiet strength left no room for Levin's characterization to survive. Her ability to stay grounded in the face of ridicule reflected the kind of discipline that comes from practicing law. In a courtroom, attorneys cannot afford to crumble when confronted with hostile questioning or dismissive attitudes from the bench. They have to keep their arguments sharp and their demeanor under control, even when emotions run high. Crockett's experience in those environments had prepared her for moments like this, where staying composed was not just a choice but a strategy. Levin had hoped his mockery would rattle her, but in practice, it provided her with an opportunity to demonstrate the poise that defined her work. The silence in the room following her response spoke volumes. It wasn't the silence of confusion, it was the silence of recognition. People understood that what she had just said did more than defend her own degree. It exposed the emptiness in Levin's attack. When an audience watches someone dismantle criticism without raising their voice, the weight of that composure lingers longer than the words themselves. In that silence, Levin's laughter seemed smaller, his insult less substantial, almost flimsy in comparison to her calm authority. Crockett went on to explain how her law degree had not only been about achieving a title, but about equipping herself to serve. She told the audience about the kinds of cases she had taken, about defending people who otherwise might have had no advocate. In doing so, she drew a stark line between Levin's mockery and her own lived reality. She wasn't defending her degree as a piece of paper, she was defending it as a weapon against injustice. That was the part of her story Levin had no access to, the part he couldn't belittle because it wasn't abstract. It was tangible, rooted in real lives and real outcomes. For Levin, the jab may have been just another evening's commentary, forgotten once the broadcast ended. For Crockett, the mockery turned into an occasion to underline what made her different from him. He thrived on derision. She thrived on credibility. He generated outrage for an audience. She generated results for her community. By calmly addressing his insult, she invited the audience to make the comparison themselves. And once that comparison was made, the imbalance was obvious. What gave her words their edge was not volume but truth. Levin could shout, he could sneer, he could laugh. But none of those tactics could erase the fact that Crockett had lived out the work her law degree promised. She didn't just earn the credential, she used it. That usage carried a weight far greater than Levin's commentary. By keeping her tone even and her message precise, she let the truth do the heavy lifting. The effect was simple but powerful. Levin's insult collapsed under the weight of reality, and her calm response stood in its place. The exchange between Jasmine Crockett and Mark Levin revealed something deeper than a clash of personalities. It underscored the gulf between commentary and credibility. Levin had positioned himself as someone who could mock and diminish Crockett's background, but when she responded, it became clear that his words floated in a realm far removed from the ground she walked on daily. His attack was fueled by the comfort of a studio microphone, where the stakes never extended beyond ratings and sound bites. Her response was fueled by years of applying her legal training in real spaces where outcomes determined livelihoods, freedoms, and futures. That difference between generating noise and producing results was what made the audience shift in their seats and reconsider whose voice carried more weight. Crockett's law degree was not simply an academic credential. It was a foundation for her legal practice and eventually her political career. She had handled real clients, real cases, and real consequences. Levin, by contrast, had built his career on critiquing, debating, and often ridiculing others without having to test his words in the arena of direct accountability. This was why her clapback hit so hard. When she said that her degree had equipped her to fight injustice, she was not speaking in abstractions. She was referencing a lived reality. The contrast between Levin's commentary and her credibility became glaring. One man entertained by diminishing others. The other woman defined by her ability to deliver for those who depended on her. The room where she spoke carried that weight. People who listened to her response were not hearing theory. They were hearing proof. Crockett explained that her law degree had allowed her to step into courtrooms where the balance of power often tilted against the vulnerable. Levin's mockery had ignored that side of her work, pretending her degree was just a line on a resume. But as she detailed the cases she had taken, the families she had defended, and the communities she had served, Levin's laughter seemed increasingly disconnected from reality. His attempt to diminish her degree only magnified the difference between a career rooted in lived service and a career rooted in talk. What made this contrast so sharp was that Crockett never tried to match Levin's theatrical style. She didn't use his name as a punching bag. Instead, she simply placed her experiences beside his comments, letting the difference speak for itself. That difference became undeniable. On one side was a man mocking credentials as though they were hollow symbols. On the other was a woman who had used those credentials to fight in spaces that demanded resilience, intellect, and courage. When the audience considered the two pictures side by side, the credibility gap was obvious. Levin's words were designed to create doubt, to reduce Crockett's accomplishments into something negligible. But doubt cannot stand when truth is presented clearly. Crockett reminded everyone that her degree wasn't about prestige, it was about preparation. She hadn't earned it to sit on a shelf. She had earned it to engage directly with the machines of the legal system, where human lives are impacted by the outcome of every case. That kind of credibility is not easily dismissed, no matter how loudly someone mocks from behind a microphone. The moment also illustrated a broader point about how commentary and credibility function differently. Commentary thrives in spaces where there's no accountability, where words disappear once the next segment begins. Credibility, however, thrives in spaces where words must translate into action, where someone's well-being depends on whether you deliver. Crockett's career had been a testament to that principle, while Levin's commentary revealed how easy it is to dismiss from afar what one has never attempted up close. When Crockett spoke, her audience wasn't just hearing a defense of her degree. They were hearing the voice of someone who had lived out its meaning. The silence that followed her words reflected the weight of that realization. People recognized that Levin's mockery lacked substance in the face of her truth. He had called her degree into question, but she had answered not with bluster but with evidence. The credibility she carried could not be erased by a sneer. If anything, his laughter had become a foil that highlighted the seriousness of her journey. His commentary had created the setup, but her credibility had delivered the conclusion. That is why the story spread beyond the room. The power of her response was not in cleverness or theatrics, but in the undeniable contrast she revealed. Levin had mocked, but in doing so, he had set the stage for Crockett to remind everyone that there is a chasm between being loud and being effective. That contrast, commentary on one side and credibility on the other, was what truly silenced the room, and it was a silence that no amount of Levin's laughter could undo. The silence that followed Jasmine Crockett's response to Mark Levin was not the uneasy kind that lingers when people don't know how to react. It was the silence that arrives when truth has been laid out so clearly that no one feels the need to add anything more. Levin had mocked her law degree, laughing it off as little more than paper, but when she calmly explained the years of work, service, and sacrifice that degree represented, the room fell still. That stillness was not weakness. It was power. It demonstrated that sometimes the strongest statement isn't made with thunderous applause or heated back, but with the collective recognition that a point has landed so squarely, it cannot be contested. Levin built his career on noise. His talk radio style depended on constant energy, constant derision, and the kind of volume that fills silence before it can even form. But in the forum where Crockett addressed his comments, silence became the most powerful force in the room. By refusing to meet his mockery with equal noise, she shifted the atmosphere completely. People were left with no option but to sit with the truth of her words. Levin could laugh at her from afar, but in that moment, his laughter seemed hollow compared to the calm authority she projected. The silence wasn't empty. It was layered with meaning. It carried the recognition that Levin's attempt to diminish her had not only failed, but had given her an opportunity to elevate herself without exaggeration. It carried the understanding that Crockett's law degree was not just a credential, but a symbol of perseverance and service. And most importantly, it carried the unspoken acknowledgement that her authority was earned, not manufactured. In that silence, Levin's voice, so often booming through radios and podcasts, was absent. His insult had no echo in that room because it had been met with something stronger than outrage, unshakable credibility. What silences a room is rarely volume, it is clarity. Crockett provided that clarity when she reminded the audience why her degree mattered. She spoke of how it allowed her to step into spaces where people without power needed representation, where justice needed advocates who could stand firm against systems designed to overwhelm. Levin's mockery tried to strip that meaning away, to reduce it to nothing, but in responding, Crockett reattached the full weight of her experiences to the degree he had tried to belittle. The silence that followed wasn't a lack of response. It was the room collectively absorbing the depth of that meaning. Levin's role in this moment cannot be overlooked. Without his insult, there would have been no need for her to articulate what her law degree represented. In mocking her, he had set the stage, perhaps unknowingly, for her to define herself in her own terms. His commentary had created the conflict, but it was Crockett's composure that created the resolution. That is the irony. Levin, whose voice thrives on being the loudest in the room, ended up contributing to a moment where silence, not noise, became the dominant sound. Asterisk, the people in the audience weren't the only ones affected by this shift. When stories of her response spread, what resonated most was not the line she delivered, but the stillness that followed. Clips shared online focused less on the words themselves and more on the atmosphere that hung in the air afterward. That atmosphere told the story better than anything else. Levin's attempt at belittlement had dissolved into nothingness, while Crockett's authority lingered long after she had finished speaking. Asterisk, silence can sometimes be uncomfortable. But in this case, it was affirming. It confirmed that Crockett had spoken from a place of truth that didn't require embellishment. It confirmed that Levin's insult, though sharp in its delivery, carried no staying power once placed alongside her reality. And it confirmed that authority often doesn't need to shout it, simply needs to stand. In that stillness, Crockett stood taller, not because she raised her voice, but because she didn't have to. Asterisk, the irony of the moment was clear. A man who made his living on volume had been answered not with equal noise but with quiet conviction. That quiet conviction was enough to eclipse his laughter entirely. Levin had mocked her law degree in hopes of making it seem insignificant. Yet his words became insignificant when weighed against the silence that followed her response. That silence was not emptiness, it was present. The kind of presence that silences, not by force, but by truth. Asterisk, in the end, what lingered in people's minds was not Levin's insult, but Crockett's poise. They remembered the way she refused to be rattled, the way she turned mockery into an opportunity to display strength, and the way silence became her most powerful ally. Levin had mocked, laughed, and tried to dismiss, but the room had been silenced, not by his noise, but by her truth. When the dust settled on the exchange between Mark Levin and Jasmine Crockett, what remained wasn't the sting of his mockery, but the memory of her composure. Levin had tried to reduce her to a caricature, someone whose law degree was just a paper credential. But the moment he did, he opened the door for Crockett to show why such dismissal had no staying power. She didn't rage against his words. She didn't try to one-up his laughter. Instead, she allowed her own lived experience to stand beside his commentary, and in that comparison, the outcome was clear. Asterisk, Levin's reputation has long been tied to volume and derision, two amplifying doubts about those he disagrees with. His jab at Crockett's law degree fit that mold, perfectly sharp, mocking, and designed to entertain. But entertainment and truth rarely hold the same weight. Crockett's quiet clapback reminded everyone that words on a microphone cannot erase years of legal training, the rigors of the courtroom, or the service that defined her career. Where Levin relied on spectacle, Crockett relied on substance. And substance has a way of cutting through noise more effectively than any insult. Asterisk. The story of that moment didn't travel because of Levin's laugh. It traveled because of what followed after Crockett's response, the silence, the recognition, the clarity. Audiences who saw or heard about it didn't come away impressed with his mockery. They came away remembering how she dismantled it without raising her voice. In that sense, Levin's attempt at belittlement backfired. It gave Crockett the stage to display her credibility and exposed the limits of his commentary when placed against her truth. Asterisk. What makes the ending of this story significant is not just that Crockett silenced a room, but how she did it. She didn't claim perfection. She didn't demand applause. She simply stood on her own record and let it speak for itself. That kind of authority is difficult to challenge because it is rooted in experience rather than rhetoric. Levin's jab was fleeting, but her response was lasting because it tapped into something deeper. The reality that education and service matter more than derision and spectacle. Asterisk, in the broader sense. This clash serves as a reminder of the difference between those who build credibility and those who tear at it for entertainment. Levin thrives on questioning others from afar. Crockett thrives on standing in the spaces where decisions and justice are on the line. When their worlds collided in this exchange, only one side left with its authority intact. The room didn't cheer for Levin's punchline. It grew still in respect for Crockett's truth. Asterisk, in the end. What silenced the room wasn't just Crockett's words, it was the undeniable recognition that her authority had been earned. Levin may have mocked, but his laughter faded quickly. Crockett's presence, her service, and her composure remained. That was the true ending. The triumph of substance over noise, of credibility over commentary, and of silence over mock.